Have you ever walked past a cemetery at night and felt a sudden chill, like a pair of unseen eyes were following your every move? I have, and I wish I could say it was just my imagination. My friends, Alex, Chloe, and I were what you might call amateur ghost hunters. We'd heard whispers about Blackwood Cemetery, a place so old that some of the headstones had been worn smooth by time and weather. The legend was that the spirit of a groundskeeper, old Silas, still roamed the grounds, forever guarding the dead. One moonless Saturday night, armed with nothing more than cheap flashlights and a whole lot of misplaced confidence, we decided to see for ourselves. We hopped the rusty iron fence around midnight. The air inside was instantly colder, still and heavy, like the world outside had just faded away. The only sounds were our own hushed breaths and the crunch of dead leaves under our feet. We started wandering through the rows of crooked tombstones. Alex was filming everything with his phone, narrating in a dramatic whisper. Chloe, ever the skeptic, was rolling her eyes, kicking at loose stones. "See? Nothing," she said, her voice a little too loud in the oppressive silence. And that's when it happened. A faint sound drifted from the far end of the cemetery. It was a rhythmic scraping noise. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag, like a shovel being pulled across stone. We froze. Alex lowered his phone, and even Chloe's smug look vanished. "It's probably just a branch," she whispered, but her voice trembled. We turned our flashlights in the direction of the sound. The beams cut through the darkness, landing on a shadowy figure near an old mausoleum. It was a tall, hunched man, holding what looked like a long-handled shovel. His back was to us. We couldn't see his face, but we didn't need to. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over us. Silas. The name echoed in my mind. We were paralyzed, watching him. He slowly turned his head, and though his face was obscured by shadow and distance, I could feel his gaze lock onto us. It felt like ice water being poured down my spine. That's what broke the spell. Alex yelped and scrambled backward, tripping over a root. I grabbed Chloe's arm and just screamed, "Run!" We didn't look back. We sprinted through the maze of graves, our hearts hammering against our ribs, the scraping sound seeming to follow us, getting closer and closer. I remember the cold sting of a branch whipping across my face, the panic rising in my throat, choking me. We practically threw ourselves over the fence, landing in a heap on the cold pavement outside. We didn't stop running until the streetlights of the main road were in sight. We never talked about what we saw that night. Alex deleted the footage. Chloe never suggested another late-night adventure. But sometimes, when it's quiet and dark, I can still hear it. That awful, rhythmic scraping. Blackwood Cemetery holds its secrets tight, and its guardian, Silas, is always on duty. We learned the hard way that some legends are better left undisturbed. Thanks for listening. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button for more tales from the dark. Stay safe out there. I've always believed that a good neighbor can make a new house feel like a home, but a bad one can turn it into a nightmare. When I first moved into my little suburban house, I was excited. It was my first time living alone, a fresh start. My neighbors on the left were a sweet elderly couple who brought me a freshly baked pie. But the neighbor on the right, that was a different story. His name was Mr. Harrison. He was a recluse, a gaunt figure I'd only see in glimpses through my kitchen window. His house was a stark contrast to the rest of the manicured lawns on our street. The paint was peeling, the garden was a jungle of weeds, and the windows were always dark, like vacant eyes. The first time we officially met, I was taking out the trash. He was standing by his fence, just staring. He didn't blink. "No," was all he said, his voice a dry rasp. I tried to be friendly, introducing myself, but he just gave a slow, unsettling nod and shuffled back inside without another word. It was weird, but I just brushed it off. Some people are just private, right? But then the strange things started happening. I'd come home from work to find one of my garden gnomes moved to a different spot. A small, insignificant thing, but it was always slightly closer to his property line. Then I started hearing noises at night. A soft scratching sound on the side of my house, right below my bedroom window. Every time I'd rush to look, there was nothing there, just the wind rustling the leaves. I told myself I was being paranoid, that living alone was just getting to me. One evening, I was watching a movie when my power suddenly went out. Not the whole street, just my house. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, and went to check the circuit breaker in the basement. The basement door, which I always kept locked, was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called out, "Hello," but only silence answered. With my phone's light cutting a weak beam through the darkness, I crept down the wooden stairs. Each step creaked ominously. Everything seemed normal until my light swept across the far wall. And that's when I saw it. Scrawled in what looked like dirt or mud were words. "I see you." I didn't even scream. I just turned and ran. I flew up the stairs, out the front door, and didn't stop until I was pounding on the door of the elderly couple next door. They called the police for me. The officers did a thorough search. They found the basement window had been forced open, the latch broken. But there was no sign of Mr. Harrison. In fact, when they went to question him, his house was completely empty. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The police report officially called it a break-in by an unknown intruder. But I know who it was. The weirdest part? The next morning, as I was packing a bag to stay with a friend, I glanced over at his property. All my garden gnomes, every single one of them, were lined up neatly along his side of the fence, facing my house. As if they were watching. I sold the house a month later. I never found out what happened to Mr. Harrison, or if that was even his real name. Sometimes, late at night, I still think I hear scratching sounds outside my window. I've learned that the scariest monsters aren't the ones in movies. They're the ones who might be living right next door. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe for more strange stories. Stay safe out there. The late-night janitor shift was supposed to be easy money. Mop the floors, wipe down the lockers, and be out by dawn. Lincoln High was just an old building, all brick and echoing hallways. But tonight, something felt different. The usual silence was replaced by a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of my shoes. I tried to ignore it, cranking up the music in my headphones and focusing on the rhythm of my mop swinging back and forth across the linoleum. That's when I heard it. A locker door slammed shut down the hall. Not just closed, but slammed with a violent bang that echoed like a gunshot. I ripped my headphones off, my heart pounding against my ribs. Silence. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Only my own voice came back to me, distorted and hollow in the empty space. I told myself it was just the old building settling, or maybe a draft, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pushed my cleaning cart towards the science wing, the wheels squeaking nervously. The humming was louder here, and the air grew cold. As I passed the biology lab, I glanced through the small window in the door. Inside, the anatomical skeleton we all called Mr. Bones was different. It wasn't hanging on its stand. It was standing in the middle of the room, its skeletal head tilted as if it were listening. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked again. It was back on its stand, motionless. My breath hitched. I had to be losing my mind. I decided to just finish the main hall and get out. As I rounded the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Long, wet footprints trailed down the freshly mopped floor. They were impossibly long and thin, not human-shaped at all. They led from the biology lab and disappeared around the next corner towards the gymnasium. I was frozen in place, my mop handle gripped so tight my knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave everything and get out. But my car keys were in my jacket, hanging in the janitor's closet on the other side of the gym. I had no choice. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I began to creep forward, my every step silent. The humming was a deafening roar now, seeming to come from the gym itself. I peeked through the double door's thin glass panels. The vast, dark space was empty, except for a single basketball slowly, silently rolling across the center of the court. It rolled as if pushed by an unseen hand, stopping directly under the far basket. Then, a sound from above. A slow, rhythmic creak. I looked up at the retractable bleachers, which were folded high against the wall. A figure was perched up there, crouched in the shadows like a gargoyle. It was long and emaciated, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. As my eyes adjusted, I saw its head snap in my direction. It had no face, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin. But I knew it saw me. It let out a low, guttural click, a sound that rattled in my bones. It unfolded itself from the rafters and dropped to the gym floor with a sickening thud, landing silently on all fours. It moved with a horrifying, insect-like grace, its long limbs carrying it across the floor at an impossible speed. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat. I just turned and ran. I fled through the hallways, the creature's clicking pursuit echoing behind me. Lockers rattled as I passed, the sound of its claws scraping against the metal getting closer and closer. I burst through the front doors and didn't stop running until the streetlights of my own neighborhood were in sight. I never went back for my keys, my jacket, or my last paycheck. Some say Lincoln High is just an old school, but I know what hunts its halls after the sun goes down. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear that clicking sound, and I wonder if it's still waiting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chills. Stay safe out there. The old road sign was barely legible, splintered wood covered in moss. Welcome to Havenwood, it probably once said. Now, it just felt like a warning. I was lost, my GPS had died hours ago, and a storm was rolling in fast. Havenwood looked like my only option for shelter. It was one of those places you see in postcards from a forgotten era. Quaint houses with wraparound porches, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a single church steeple piercing the bruised, purple sky. But as I drove down Main Street, a feeling of unease crawled up my spine. There were no people, not a single soul. No cars, no kids playing in yards, no one rocking on the porches. Just an unnerving, heavy silence broken only by the wind whistling through the eaves of the houses. I parked in front of the general store, the bell above the door chiming with a hollow sound as I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the grimy windows. The shelves were stocked, but everything was coated in a thick layer of dust, as if frozen in time. Canned goods from decades ago, candy bars with faded wrappers. Hello, my voice echoed, sounding small and frail. No answer. I walked deeper into the store, my footsteps creaking on the old floorboards. Behind the counter, I saw it. A ledger, open to a recent date. Just yesterday's date, in fact. The handwriting was a neat, looping script. The entry read, New arrival. 1. My blood ran cold. Was it talking about me? How could they know? Suddenly, the bell above the door chimed again. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing in the doorway was a tall, thin man in an old-fashioned suit. His face was pale, his eyes dark and empty. He didn't smile. He just stared. You're lost, he said, his voice a dry whisper, like rustling leaves. It wasn't a question. We've been expecting you. Expecting me? The fear was a physical thing now, a tight knot in my stomach. Who are you? I stammered, backing away slowly. I'm the greeter, he said, taking a slow step forward. Everyone in Havenwood has a role. And soon, you will too. The other residents began to emerge from the shadows of the store, their faces just as pale, their eyes just as empty. They moved with a strange, jerky slowness, surrounding me. There was the baker, still in his flour-dusted apron. The librarian, her glasses perched on her nose. The sheriff, his badge tarnished. They weren't alive. Not really. They were like puppets, their strings pulled by some unseen force that permeated this town. The greeter's lips curved into a semblance of a smile. Don't be afraid, he whispered, his voice now sounding like it was coming from all around me. You won't be leaving. But you won't be alone, either. We're a tight-knit community here in Havenwood. We always have room for one more. I looked at the open ledger on the counter. The neat script. New arrival. 1. I finally understood. This wasn't a shelter from the storm. It was the storm's very heart. And I had just driven right into it. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence of Havenwood, a town that collects souls instead of people. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness. It started with the roses. A single, perfect red rose left on my doorstep every morning. At first, I thought it was a secret admirer, someone from work maybe. It was kind of sweet, romantic even. I'd pick it up, smile, and put it in a vase on my kitchen counter. After a week, I had a whole bouquet. But then things started to change. One morning, instead of a rose, there was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was beautiful, but unsettling. There was no note, just the bird, its painted eyes seeming to follow me. The next day, it was a photograph. A picture of me, sleeping in my bed. My blood ran cold. How did they get in? I checked all the locks, the windows, everything was secure. I felt a knot of pure dread tighten in my stomach. This wasn't romantic anymore. This was a violation. I went to the police, but they were dismissive. Maybe you have a stalker, but without a direct threat, there's not much we can do, they said. They told me to be more careful, to change my locks. So I did. I installed a new deadbolt, a chain, even a security camera pointed at my front door. For a few days, nothing happened. The morning deliveries stopped. I started to breathe a little easier, thinking maybe I had scared them off. I was so wrong. The packages started coming to my office instead. A box of my favorite, very specific brand of tea. A book from an obscure author I'd mentioned to a friend just once, weeks ago. It was clear they were listening, not just watching. My world started to shrink. I stopped talking to friends on the phone. I'd jump at every little sound outside my apartment. The feeling of being constantly watched, of my private life being dissected by an unseen predator, was suffocating. One night, I was jolted awake by a notification on my phone. It was from my security camera. The app opened to a live feed of my front door. And there, standing on my porch, was a figure. They were dressed all in black, their face obscured by a deep hood. They weren't trying to get in. They were just standing there, perfectly still, looking directly at the camera. And then, slowly, they raised a hand and waved. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was a wave of ownership. A wave that said, "I see you. I know you're watching me watch you." I unplugged the camera. I didn't want to see anymore, but I knew they were still out there. The next morning, there was no package. There was just a single, muddy footprint on my doormat. It was pointing away from the door, as if they had just left. But the terrifying part was, there was no matching print leading up to the door. It was as if they had appeared right on my doorstep. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. I packed a bag that night, just the essentials, and left everything else behind. I drove for hours, with no destination in mind, just trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and that house. I'm staying in a motel now, hundreds of miles away. I keep the curtains drawn, and I sleep with a chair wedged under the doorknob. This morning, I went to get some ice from the machine down the hall. When I came back to my room, something was propped against the door. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, and its painted eyes were staring right at me. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, or if it gave you the chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. It was just another Tuesday night, or so I thought. The office lights flickered off behind me, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement as I started my usual walk home. The city hums differently after midnight. The daytime chaos melts away, leaving a quiet, almost eerie stillness. I usually enjoyed this walk. It was my time to decompress, to let the day's stress dissolve into the cool night air. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavier, charged with an unseen energy. I pulled my jacket tighter, quickening my pace. The familiar rhythm of my footsteps on the concrete was usually comforting, but tonight, it sounded like an alarm bell in the silence. Then I heard it. A second set of footsteps. Scuff, drag. Scuff, drag. It was out of sync with my own, slow and deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Just an empty street bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. I told myself I was being paranoid, just tired from a long day. I picked up my pace. The footsteps behind me matched my speed, but kept their own unnerving rhythm. Scuff, drag. Scuff, drag. Closer now. A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't dare look back again. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. Was it a prank? Someone trying to scare me? But the sound was so unnatural. It wasn't the sound of shoes on pavement. It was something else, something heavier, something wet. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I pretended to take a call, hoping the sound of my voice would deter whoever, or whatever, was behind me. "Hey, yeah, I'm just around the corner," I said, my voice trembling, trying to sound casual. The scuffing and dragging stopped. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. It worked. I was safe. I risked another look back. The street was still empty, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. Just as I started to breathe again, a shadow detached itself from a dark alleyway up ahead. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it moved with a disjointed, jerky motion, like a marionette with tangled strings. It wasn't walking, it was lurching, pulling one leg behind it with that same horrible scuff drag sound. The streetlight caught its face for a split second, and my blood ran cold. It had no features, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The sound was trapped in my throat. My legs, which had felt like lead moments before, were suddenly filled with adrenaline. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. I sprinted through the labyrinth of side streets, my lungs burning, not daring to look back. I could still hear it, the scuffing and dragging echoing through the empty city, sometimes seeming miles away, other times right at my heels. I finally burst onto a busier main road, the headlights of passing cars a welcome sight. I stumbled into a 24-hour diner, collapsing into a booth, gasping for air. The waitress gave me a strange look, but brought a glass of water without a word. I sat there for hours, watching the street, until the sun came up and the city returned to its normal, noisy self. I've never walked home at night since. I take a cab, even if it's just a few blocks. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I can still hear it in the back of my mind. That slow, deliberate sound. Scuff, drag. And I wonder if it's still out there, walking the empty streets, looking for someone else who's walking home alone. Thanks for watching. If you have your own creepy late-night stories, share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange tales. Stay safe out there. They say curiosity killed the cat, but for me and my friends, it was the old St. Jude's Hospital on the edge of town. We'd heard the stories, of course. Whispers of a malevolent nurse who roamed the halls, of patients who never checked out. But we were young, reckless, and armed with flashlights and a misplaced sense of bravery. We thought it would be a thrill, a story to tell for years. We were wrong. The air inside was thick and heavy, smelling of decay and antiseptic. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and medical charts scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the broken windows, sent a shiver down my spine. We tried to laugh it off, making jokes about ghosts and ghouls, but the laughter died in our throats. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. We decided to split up. A classic horror movie mistake, I know. I went with my friend Leo, heading towards the pediatric ward. The walls were covered in faded cartoon murals, their cheerful smiles now looking like grotesque grimaces in the dim light. In the center of the room sat a single rocking horse, swaying back and forth on its own. Slowly, rhythmically, we froze, our hearts pounding against our ribs. There was no wind in here, no draft. Leo, ever the skeptic, walked towards it to stop it. As his hand reached out, a child's giggle echoed from the end of the hall. It wasn't a happy sound. It was cold, and it was getting closer. We ran. We didn't look back. We sprinted down corridors that all looked the same, a disorienting maze of shadows and fear. We could hear footsteps behind us, not just the giggle anymore, but a heavy, dragging sound. The sound of a lame foot scraping against the linoleum. It was the sound from the legends, the sound of Nurse Hemlock, the matron who supposedly took her own life in the asylum wing after a terrible accident. We finally found our other friends, huddled together in the main lobby, their faces pale with terror. They'd heard it too. The dragging footstep, the chilling giggle. We scrambled for the exit, the main doors we had pried open just an hour before. But they were shut, chained, from the inside. Panic set in. We pulled, we pushed, we screamed, but the chains held fast. Then we saw her. At the far end of the long lobby, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall woman in a starched, old-fashioned nurse's uniform. Her face was obscured by shadows, but we could see the glint of something metallic in her hand. A syringe, long and sharp. The dragging sound grew louder as she moved towards us, one step at a time. The child's giggle erupted again, this time seeming to come from right beside her. I don't know how we got out. It's a blur of screaming and blind panic. One of us found a large window in a ground-floor office that was already shattered. We scrambled through, cutting ourselves on the glass, not caring about the pain, only about escaping that place. We ran and didn't stop until the silhouette of St. Jude's was a distant memory against the night sky. We never spoke of what happened again. We tried to forget, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear it. A slow, rhythmic rocking, a child's cold giggle, and a dragging footstep, getting closer and closer. Some places should be left alone. Some doors should never be opened. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have your own chilling encounters, share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the dark. Stay safe out there. Have you ever bought something old, something with a history? I did once. It was a mirror, a beautiful, ornate thing I found at a dusty flea market. The frame was carved from dark wood, with intricate vines and flowers twisting around the edges. It felt special, like it held secrets. I hung it in my hallway, right across from my bedroom door. For the first few days, it was just a mirror. It reflected my tired face in the morning and my hurried figure as I left for work. But then, strange things started to happen. It began subtly. I'd catch a flicker of movement in the reflection, just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, nothing was there. I blamed it on tired eyes, on the play of light and shadow. Then, one night, I was walking to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the mirror, I glanced at my reflection. But it wasn't just me. For a split second, I saw someone else standing behind me. A tall, shadowy figure with long, thin fingers. My heart leaped into my throat, and I spun around. The hallway was empty. My own breath was loud in the silence. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, a reflection from a window, anything but what I thought I saw. But the feeling of being watched never left me. It was a constant, cold pressure at the back of my neck. I started avoiding the hallway, taking the long way around through the living room just so I wouldn't have to pass that mirror. The nights got worse. I'd hear faint scratching sounds coming from the hallway, like nails dragging against wood. I'd lie in bed, frozen, listening. Sometimes, a soft whisper would drift from the other side of my bedroom door. It was too faint to make out the words, but the tone was chilling, a sibilant hiss that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I started sleeping with my lights on, convinced that something was out there in my home. One evening, I came home late from work, exhausted. I forgot to avoid the hallway and walked right past the mirror. I stopped, my keys still in my hand. In the reflection, my apartment looked different. The walls were peeling, the furniture was covered in dusty sheets, and the air seemed thick with decay. It was my apartment, but not. It was a dead version of it. And in the middle of the reflected room stood the figure. It was clearer this time. A woman, her face pale and gaunt, with hollow, dark eyes that stared right through me. Her dress was from another era, tattered and gray. She slowly raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at my reflection. That's when I saw it. My own reflection wasn't mirroring my actions. While I stood there, paralyzed with fear, my reflection slowly began to smile. It was a wide, unnatural grin that stretched its face too far. It took a step forward, towards the surface of the mirror, as if it wanted to climb out. I finally broke free from my trance. I screamed, dropped my keys, and ran out of the apartment without looking back. I never went back for my things. I called the landlord the next day and told him I was moving out. I didn't explain why. How could I? How do you tell someone that your mirror is haunted, that your own reflection tried to break free? Sometimes, I still think about that mirror. I wonder who owns it now. I wonder if they ever catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of their eye, or if they ever see a smiling face looking back at them, a face that is theirs, but not. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're completely alone in your own home? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, the sudden chill that makes you glance over your shoulder? Most of us just brush it off. An overactive imagination, a draft from a window. But what if it's something more? What if someone, or something, is actually there? This is the story of Sarah, a young woman living in a bustling city. Her apartment was her sanctuary, a small, cozy space on the fifth floor of an old but charming building. She loved her little home, with its creaky floorboards and the comforting hum of the city outside her window. One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah came home exhausted. She kicked off her shoes, threw her keys on the counter, and flopped onto the sofa. That's when she first noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the wooden floor near her front door. It wasn't there this morning. She frowned, thinking maybe she'd done it herself with her heel, and thought nothing more of it. A few days later, she found another one. This time, it was on the wall in her hallway, a thin, faint line in the paint. It was strange. She was careful with her apartment. She lived alone and hadn't had any guests. A sense of unease began to creep in. She started double-checking the locks before she went to bed, a habit she'd never felt the need for before. The strangeness escalated. Things would be slightly out of place. A book moved from her nightstand to the coffee table. A coffee mug she was sure she'd left in the sink, now clean and dry in the cupboard. It was subtle, so subtle that she started to question her own sanity. Was she just being forgetful? Stressed? The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday night. She was watching a movie, curled up under a blanket, when she heard a faint sound from her bedroom. A soft, rhythmic tap. Tap, tap, tap. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She muted the TV, listening intently. Silence. Maybe it was just the rain against the window pane. She tried to relax, but the silence was now more unnerving than the sound had been. Slowly, she got up and tiptoed towards her bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, just as she'd left it. She pushed it open, her hand trembling. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the city lights outside. Nothing seemed out of place. Her bed was made. Her clothes were put away. She let out a shaky breath, feeling a little foolish. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught a reflection in the mirror on her wardrobe. For a split second, she saw a figure standing behind her. Tall, impossibly thin, with long, spindly limbs. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. A trick of the light. It had to be. But then, her gaze fell to the floor. And there, etched into the wood by the foot of her bed, were 3 fresh scratches, long and deep. Deeper than the others. She backed away slowly, her eyes wide with terror, never looking away from the empty space where the figure had stood. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just backed out of the room, grabbed her keys and her phone, and walked out of the apartment, closing the doors softly behind her. She never went back. She called the landlord the next day and made up an excuse about a family emergency. She left all her belongings behind. Some say she moved to a different city, trying to escape the memory. But the story doesn't end there. The next tenant who moved into that apartment, a young man named Alex, started noticing strange things too. Small scratches on the floor, objects moving on their own. He thought he was going crazy, until one day he decided to install a security camera just to prove to himself that he was imagining things. He checked the footage the next morning. It showed him sleeping peacefully in his bed. But as he watched, a closet door in the corner of the room creaked open. From the darkness within, a long, pale hand emerged, followed by a thin arm. A figure slowly unfolded itself from the impossibly small space. It moved without a sound, creeping across the room until it stood over his bed. It just stood there, for hours, watching him sleep. Just before dawn, it retreated back into the closet, pulling the door shut behind it. The urban legend is called the Watcher. It's said that it doesn't want to harm you. It just wants to live with you, to watch you. It hides in the small, forgotten spaces of your home, in the back of your closet, in the crawl space, under your bed. So next time you feel that prickling on your neck, when you feel like you're not alone, maybe you aren't. Thank you for listening, and remember to check your locks. You never know who might already be inside. The old house stood at the end of a long, forgotten lane, swallowed by ivy and shadows. I bought it for a steal, of course. The real estate agent had mumbled something about its history, but I was too focused on the low price and the beautiful, albeit dilapidated, architecture. My plan was simple. Fix it up, flip it, and make a hefty profit. The first few weeks were a dream. I replaced warped floorboards, patched up the roof, and gave the walls a fresh coat of paint. It was hard work, but satisfying. The house felt like it was breathing again. That's when I started noticing the mirrors. There were so many of them. Ornate, gold-leaf frames in the living room. A simple, round one in the hallway. A massive, full-length mirror in the master bedroom. I didn't think much of it at first. People in the old days liked mirrors. But as I worked, I started feeling like I was being watched. I'd be sanding a door frame and catch a flicker of movement in a reflection. When I'd turn, there was nothing there. Just me, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, and my own reflection staring back. One evening, I was cleaning the large mirror in the bedroom. It was coated in a thick layer of grime. As I wiped away the dirt, I noticed something strange. My reflection, it wasn't quite right. It was smiling, but I wasn't. A cold dread washed over me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The reflection was normal now, mimicking my own worried expression. I brushed it off as exhaustion. I'd been working 16-hour days, after all. My mind was playing tricks on me. But it kept happening. Little things, at first. My reflection would scratch its nose when mine was still. It would have a stray hair that I didn't. I started avoiding the mirrors, covering them with sheets. But the feeling of being watched only intensified. I started hearing whispers, faint as the rustling of leaves, just on the edge of my hearing. They seemed to come from the walls, from the floors, from everywhere at once. The breaking point came last night. I was in the kitchen making a late dinner when I heard a crash from the upstairs bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed a heavy wrench from my toolbox and crept up the stairs. The door to the master bedroom was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The sheet I had draped over the full-length mirror was on the floor. And standing in front of the mirror wasn't my reflection. It was me. But not me. This version of me was dressed in my clothes. But they were torn and stained with something dark. Its face was pale, its eyes sunken and hollow. And it was smiling that same, awful smile from the first time. It didn't look at me. It just stared into the mirror at its own ghastly image. Then, it slowly raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. On my side of the mirror, a faint, ghostly handprint began to form on the surface, an icy condensation spreading from the palm. I didn't scream. I just backed away, slowly, quietly. I didn't grab my keys, my wallet, or anything else. I ran out of that house, and I didn't look back. The real estate agent won't answer my calls now. I've been sleeping in my car, miles away, but I can't get the image out of my head. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the rearview mirror, I see it for just a second. That other me, smiling. I think it's waiting. Waiting to step out of the glass and take my place. I don't think it just wanted the house. I think it wants my life.